Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast. And my guest today is Drew Manning. He is the guy who lost 60 pounds gained 60 pounds on purpose and then put it back on and then did it again. And so that's how I know who Drew is. I think that's how a lot of people know who Drew is. So welcome to the show, brother.
Mike, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, Drew, just before we get started, can you give the audience just a little bit of a brief background about yourself?
Yeah. So, I'm assuming you're talking about the Fit to Fat to Fit story, or even before that.
Yeah. Well, maybe just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the story.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a family of 11 brothers and sisters, and we all played sports as kids. And so I've always been into health and fitness. I'm a dad of 2 daughters, a girl dad, which I'm proud of and love. I love being a dad. I live here in Hawaii, and I'm very blessed to live here. And we'll get into what Fit to Fat to Fit is. But yeah, a little bit of like me growing up with 11 siblings and playing sports kind of ties into the story, because my whole life I've always been in shape until I decided to do a crazy experiment, which kind of went viral back in the day.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that too, because I, have always been fit too. So like 14 years old, I was like the first guy in my high school that like started working out essentially. Maybe it was a couple hours at the same time. And then since then, like literally since 14, and I'm 39 now, like I've never really besides vacation, I've never like not gone to the gym like more or less like 5 to 6 days a week. And sometimes it's, close to 7, closer to 7. So, like I understand that. And I've always kind of thought, man, it would be nice to have those like before and after pictures. Because when people do those, like their accounts blow up. Like there's a guy I had on recently, and his account blew up. I'm not sure if you know who Dave Dana is on Twitter, but he's got like almost 100,000 followers. I think he only started maybe like last year. He just started losing a bunch of weight and posting. So I've always been, almost jealous of like these guys who start with this like project, so to speak, or with a lot of weight to lose, and then have these great before and after pics, right? I just kind of have these continuous pics for my whole life. But so it kind of sounds like, Drew, you are the same type as I was. You basically didn't know what it was like to be unfit because you picked up fitness right away, fell in love with it, and couldn't stop it. And then eventually you did stop and you gained 50 pounds on purpose. So tell us a little bit about that and why you did it.
Yeah. So, kind of, ties into what I was saying in the beginning about growing up in shape. And I became a personal trainer in 2009. And I was training one of my clients at the time, and he was my brother-in-law. And I would get frustrated with him. I was like, because back in those days, I was very black and white mentality, like kind of judgmental. I'll be totally honest with you. Like in my mind, it seems so easy to be in shape. Like, why is it so hard for people? You just put down the junk food, you go to the gym. And I couldn't understand why my clients struggled to just stick to the meal plan and the workouts, when for me, it was so easy. And he kind of pointed that out to me at one point. Was like, dude, he's like, Drew, you don't understand how hard it is for me. He's like, for you, it's been easy your whole life. But for me and people like me, it's way harder than you think. And I kind of was like thinking about that. I'm like, okay, maybe there's something I could learn as a trainer. Maybe I'm not seeing something. And so I was trying to think of ideas of how I could better understand what it's like. And for whatever reason, this idea of getting fat on purpose, as crazy and ridiculous as that sounds, it made sense in my mind, where it kind of felt like a calling, if you will. Like I was feeling called to do this crazy experiment. I checked with my wife at the time, and she was pregnant. And she was like, okay, so you're telling me we're going to have junk food in the house, which she was stoked about, because I was kind of more of the health nut in the relationship. And so she was like, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, me too. In my
relationship. Okay. So anyways, it was very, I had a lot of support and from her and from a lot of friends about doing this experiment. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I had started my own website. I started a YouTube channel, Facebook page, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to like start gaining weight and tell my friends about it. and documented it as it went. And before you know it, dude, like a couple months in, like Jay Leno got word of it, had me on his show. All these producers from, all these TV shows were calling me and like trying to get a hold of me to come on, because my story landed on yahoo.com one day of this trainer becoming obese on purpose. And, 6 months of no exercise, eating, standard American diet, lots of highly processed junk foods, which tasted delicious. I'm not going to lie. I ended up putting actually 75 pounds on in 6 months time, and then lost it in the next 6 months. And that's kind of a little bit of the backstory behind Fit to Fat to Fit.
Holy shit. So just wondering, did you get any blood markers done before and after?
I did not until maybe a month or two into my journey. I didn't really think about that in the beginning because I didn't really know what I was doing. I just kind of had this idea and ran with it. But I did have a doctor kind of monitor me throughout. I can't remember a lot of the numbers off the top of my head. I do remember my blood pressure, though, got up to 167 over 113, which was not good. And my testosterone levels dropped to around 200 at my heaviest. As a 31-year-old, I was 31 when I first did it.
And did your estrogen go up as well?
I don't remember. Those were the two numbers that stick out to me. This is back in 2011. So I wish I had access to that now, but yeah.
No, I ask about the estrogen because, as you probably know, Drew, like as people put on weight, there's more likely for them to convert testosterone to estrogen because there's an enzyme in body fat called aromatase that converts testosterone to estrogen. So, that's something that, a lot of obese people struggle with. In some ways, and not to delve off from your story, but can make you, a little bit more empathetic to those people. It's like, okay, well, they're super obese, maybe their testosterone is super low. So I understand why, they may not have the motivation to, get up and go. Now, that's not an excuse, like by any means, like you still have to get up and go, but it just makes you as a person like more empathetic and more understanding for why that person, may be making the decisions that they're making.
Yeah. Well, the whole journey, honestly, was so humbling in so many ways. It definitely opened up my eyes. And yeah, the magic word for me is empathy for those that struggle. Because like I said, I used to be judgmental and I used to think it was so easy until I did the experiment myself. And even though I was only overweight for 6 months, there were so many factors physically, mentally, and emotionally combine all of those that made me, respect the journey so much more and have so much more respect and understanding and empathy for those that struggle. Because like I said, it used to seem so simple. And yes, in theory, it's simple. Eat less, work out, but we're not robots. Humans, we're emotional creatures. And there's so many things that factor into someone's ability to stay consistent with a healthy diet and exercise routine that, is way beyond just macros and calories and, supplements. It's so much more complicated than that for most people, even though in theory, it's simple from a, biological perspective, but in application, like I said, it's, humans are, complex creatures, and it's not as simple as just eating less and working out for most people.
I agree. I think, sure, you can say eating less, working out, but how do you, eat less and not work out? That's the thing there. But one thing that, I heard you saying there is that, it was hard. So like, what specifically was hard? Was it hard how other people treated you? Was it hard how you felt mentally? Was it hard not to go to the gym? Did you feel like depressed because you couldn't work out and you weren't getting that like endorphin rush? Like what was, specifically that was difficult about it for you?
Yeah, there was quite a bit that was difficult. And you mentioned some of them there. I would say the first thing that was really difficult was the identity around my body image. My body image at that point was my self-image, meaning in my mind, I was Drew the fit guy. So even the first 20 pounds were super difficult and uncomfortable for me because my whole life I had built this image and identity around my body, looking a certain way, 6-pack, abs and muscles. And then not to have that after like the first 10 to 20 pounds, psychologically, I had an identity crisis where I didn't know who I was anymore. I remember wanting to go up to strangers and explain to them like, hey, I'm not really overweight. Like, this is just an experiment. Like, I don't really look like this normally, because I was so uncomfortable and I kind of freaked out. because I had this identity crisis happening as I was gaining the weight. I wouldn't take my shirt off in public. Super self-conscious. I was married at the time, and my wife has a chapter in my first book where she talks about, from her perspective, what she had to deal with from someone that was super emotional, probably from the estrogen that you were talking about earlier, where I was more emotional and I was more self-conscious, and it was difficult in that sense. The food, I'll be honest with you, tasted really, really good. Like Cinnamon Toast Crunch twice a day, Hot Pockets, SpaghettiOs, mac and cheese, top ramen, chips, cookies and crackers, and sugary sodas and sugary juices, and all the delicious food we have here in America in abundance, right? That food tasted good. But the misery was how miserable it made you feel in between meals. So you would feel good while you're eating the delicious food, but in between there's like indigestion, gas and bloating, and you get these spikes in blood sugar levels with crashes. And so you're kind of, and then your sleep is affected. And when your sleep is affected, your cortisol is elevated. And, that's probably what caused my testosterone levels to drop over time, and all this cascade of effects that happen from, lack of sleep and, so many other factors. And then on the flip side, when I started losing weight, the hard part of that was I didn't realize how powerful, like, the connection to food was when I got off of it. So I went cold turkey after 6 months. And that right there, the first 2 weeks were hell for my body, because I thought I would feel good right away, like drinking green smoothies and eating salads and, chicken and broccoli. But the food tasted horrible compared to what I remember it tasting like. I was hungry all the time. I was grumpy. I was moody, and I was starving still. Even though I was eating 2,000 calories, I went from eating like 5,000 calories of the processed junk food to 2,000 calories. It opened up my eyes to like what my clients had been telling me when I would give them a meal plan. I'm like, okay, here you go. Be perfect. Follow the meal plan. And then me as a personal trainer struggled with cravings. And the first 2 weeks, like I said, were hell, because my body was going through these withdrawal symptoms, right? And I wasn't expecting that. And it just made me realize how powerful, there's an emotional connection to food, and there's also a biological connection to highly processed junk food that's hyper palatable. It's designed to be, as addictive as possible by these food companies that spend a lot of money into making sure that these foods, are addictive as possible. I think in most ways, it's way harder than I thought it was going to be. So there's a lot of different aspects to the journey that were difficult and hard, and those were just a few.
So it seems like, when you went back, like those first 2 weeks, that those are the most difficult. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say well, yes, it depends. Like, it's hard to compare, apples to oranges in this situation. Like, it was hard not to go to the gym because that was my stress reliever. And now not having that outlet was difficult in its own sense. But then comparing that to like the cravings and the emotional connection to food, which I wasn't prepared for, that was difficult in its own right. But it was a different type of hard, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I was kind of getting at there is like, the big thing is initiation, and I'm not saying that once you're on the right path, it's easy. You still have to, be disciplined. You're still going to have cravings sometimes. It's still going to be difficult. But I think anybody will tell you, and we'd be lying to say that once you're on, once you have momentum, it's much easier to keep it than to just start. And so it sounds like when you went back, you kind of had some rough experiences with switching to healthy food that maybe you didn't realize what some of your clients were experiencing. But because you went through that yourself, now you know some of the things that they were talking about. You actually felt them. It's not something just like you read in a book, and I'm sure, people appreciate that, Did you find getting back into the gym to be difficult to have it, or not so much? Or?
No, it was in a certain sense. And that, so the first 4 weeks when I went back to fit, all I did and focus on was switching my diet, because I didn't want to jump right back into the gym, after gaining 75 pounds and do what a lot of people do and, push really hard and end up injuring themselves. So what I did for the first 4 weeks was I just focused on nutrition, and I would go for a walk every day, and I would stretch. And that's all I did for the first 4 weeks. And then getting back into the gym. So like that first month back, I lost like 19 pounds, just changing my nutrition and walking and stretching. then eventually on week 5, I had to go back into the gym. And that was interesting because, like I said, I had this identity crisis happening. So going back into the gym, being overweight for the first time was hard for me because I was nervous about what people were going to think of me, and I was worried about being judged. And it was really difficult for me to go back, but I knew I had to because I had an audience following me. So I had to like show up. But I was definitely self-conscious about like, oh, what are people thinking? Like, oh man, that guy really let himself go. Like, you know, and people that didn't know what I was doing, which there probably were people that were like, is that the same guy? But it was humbling. It was like, you know, I compare it to being on top of this mountain your whole life. Like me and you, we've been in shape our entire lives. We've never been out of shape other than going on vacation. But to take 6-7 months off of working out and then start working out again was very humbling. To struggle to do, you know, 10 push-ups or to get in 2 pull-ups, you know, like that right there is very humbling when you're starting at the bottom of the mountain for the first time ever. It was a humbling experience to build up my strength and endurance again back in the gym. But and there was weeks where I hit plateaus. There was weeks where I gained weight, even though I was following my macros and calories and everything was on point. You know, as a personal trainer, you know, I know how to do that. But it's interesting how even for me, you know, we think weight loss should be linear, but even someone like us that has the knowledge, it's not always that way. There were weeks where I definitely didn't lose any weight or I even gained some weight. And, you know, it helped me empathize with my clients. And that's what this whole journey of Fit to Fat to Fit is about, is helping me be less judgmental, more empathetic, and being a voice for those who are judged by people who think it's easy and think they're just being lazy. So for me, it was definitely an eye-opening experience that, like I said, brought me a lot more empathy and understanding on the journey.
How do you see fat shaming? And the reason I ask is because, you know, it certainly can be a double-edged sword. I think most of the literature, if you look at on PubMed, will say that, you know, fat shaming essentially is terrible. You know, you should never do it. And, you know, I certainly don't advocate for fat shaming. And then you hear other people who say that, you know, if I wasn't shamed, I wouldn't have lost the weight. And then we also have this kind of, you know, promotion in some ways, sort of like, you know, I don't know if they're called, you know, fat influencers or obesity influencers or whatever they are. I know someone posted an article recently about, you know, a dozen of them so that actually had died. So, you know, when you're, you know, doing this, how do you make sure that you don't sort of cross over to the fat acceptance side where you're maybe, you know, promoting something?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to get a little bit deep with you on this answer. But basically, in my mind, the way I look at fat shaming is like, I think fat shaming has been around for quite a bit of time. And I think the pendulum has swung to a place of where it's kind of toxic, where people might see someone that's overweight and be like, oh, they're disgusting, they're lazy, they're this. We label them based on their appearance and think, oh, they're this type of person. And I think that's where like the fitness industry lacks empathy and there's a lot of judgment. And sure, I do think that some people maybe temporarily feel like shaming is a good way to get people to change. And just to give you a little bit of insight, I grew up in a very strict religion, and shame is used a lot to get you to obey certain commandments and to not sin. And I get the concept, I get the idea of using shame or fear. But ultimately, you follow any shame researcher like Brene Brown that talks about the detrimental long-term effects of using shame to try and get someone to change. I don't think there's any good that in the long run comes out of using shame, even though it might temporarily help someone like change their body or work really hard. But I think honestly, now it's the pendulum in the past swung really far, to this side where it's like kind of toxic, where people did feel judged, and then they are turned off by the fitness industry. Then they're just so done with the toxic kind of fat shaming that happens that they're like, I don't even want to change myself because I don't want to be a part of that industry because it's toxic. Right now, I think to get more balance, it's swung too far this way, where now it's like, hey, being obese is cool and being obese is healthy. When in reality, we all know, I think most people understand that that's not true. Right. And I think at some point it'll balance out over time. But at the same time, the way I approach people with their health and fitness is teaching them to operate out of a place of self-love versus self-hate. Because I've lived a life of self-hate and using self-hate as motivation. I grew up playing football and wrestling. And like I said, the religious environment that I grew up in was like, hey, if I hate myself enough and beat myself up enough, then I won't ever make a mistake. I won't ever sin and I'll be perfect. When in reality, that's not achievable, even though in my mind, I tried to make it so by wearing a mask, pretending I was perfect on the outside, but on the inside, I just hated myself. And when you hate yourself and you use self-hate as motivation, you tend to, get really good at wearing a mask, and it creates this internal battle or war inside of you that causes you at times to self-sabotage. And that's what happened to me on my journey. And I'm a huge proponent of learning or teaching people how to operate out of a place of self-love, because once I learned how to operate out of a place of self-love, then it made the process of getting healthy not so much a chore or a punishment. When you learn how to love yourself deep down, you start wanting to show up for yourself differently. You want to start treating your body with kindness. That doesn't mean that it's about achieving a result, meaning, I got to get a 6-pack or 10% body fat so that then I'm accepted by society and that people will love me. But what you start realizing is like, I'm worthy of good physical health. I'm worthy of good mental health and, spiritual health, if you will. And when you start realizing that you're worthy of that, you start showing up and seeing like, I'm going to eat this healthy salad, not as a means to an end. Like, this will help me get this body, which then people will love me for. It feels good to me to eat this food and treat my body with kindness by getting enough sleep, managing my stress, eating whole foods as much as possible, and moving my body in a way that feels good to me, no matter what the results are. Even if your body isn't 10% body fat, if you are doing those things, you're getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. You're managing your stress, whether that's meditation or prayer or religion or journaling or therapy. You're managing your stress. You're eating whole foods mostly. I don't care what diet you follow, but if you're eating, a good amount of protein and whole foods, and you're exercising, whatever that looks like, whether that's running, biking, swimming, dancing, Pilates, yoga, I don't care. If you're doing those 4 things and you happen to be overweight, for me, I don't think we as a society should care what their physical appearance is so much if they're living a healthy lifestyle. I think at the end of the day, if everyone just realized that they're worthy to live a healthy lifestyle, whatever that looks like for them, with kind of like those 4 pillars, sleep, stress management, nutrition, and exercise being covered, then at the end of the day, I don't think it matters what size people are. And that's kind of my approach. So like I said, that was a deep answer to your question, but
no, I really appreciate that. And there's a few things there that I want to unpack. Like, first of all, what you said about, kind of using fuel like anger and love. So I'm a big fan of Stoicism, and sorry for people who, have heard this, story a million times, but so I talk about Ryan Holiday quite a bit. And, he has one book, I think it's in Stillness is the Key, where he talks about anger and how it's like short-term fuel, and I think, and when you were, talking about your story just then, it kind of sounded like, yeah, anger can be short-term fuel. It can be helpful, but like, do you really want to live like that? And that's kind of what Ryan talks about a lot. And he talks about, doing something out of love instead of doing it from a place of anger, because first of all, that anger, that fuel that you get from it is probably short-lived. And then second of all, like, why do you want to live a life angry? Why, like, it just doesn't make sense. It's a poor choice, and then the other thing too, when you were talking about, not judging your clients, there's one thing that I've heard Joe Rogan talk about, and I've heard him say this in his podcast a few times, but he says, like, you see a person and then you judge them. He's like, at one point, like, that person was a baby, and what he means is like, they've gone through so many different stages of life to get to where they are. And like, you weren't with them for any of that time. Like, all you're just seeing is one snapshot. You have no idea what happened to them over the last 25 years, 35 years, 45 years. And maybe if you had, a picture of their entire life, you might be more empathetic towards that person, And I think that when you went through that experiment, it just kind of gave you a little bit of insight into how those people are actually feeling. Like I said, it's different when you read it in a book than when something that you've actually felt yourself, like you did. And so that was, a couple of things that I wanted to pick apart there. And then just one more thing there, Drew. Sorry, the last thing too about judging, obese people. I think that your blood markers are most important, and if all of your blood markers are in check and you're still a little bit overweight, I don't think research indicates that you're necessarily significantly less healthy than other people. Certainly if you have all your blood markers are in check and you're, in the proper BMI, there probably is some, possible health longevity effect there. But realistically, there are people who, are a little, like, if you look at a lot of, UFC heavyweights, for example, some of these guys have really good cardio. They're really strong. They're really athletic. But they're pretty overweight, so that's how I kind of see it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I love that you brought up those points about, understanding what happened to you, the stoicism. I love Ryan Holiday's books. They really resonate with me. And I think, the biggest thing for me is a quote by Teddy Roosevelt, who said, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And I think for me, I see a lack of empathy in the fitness industry because, like I said, most people don't see it from someone else's perspective. And when you lack empathy and you just place judgment on that snapshot of that person's life of where they're at today, it reminds me of a book I read by Oprah, actually, and Dr. Bruce Perry. It's titled "What Happened to You?" And it goes deep into understanding, like, if you knew someone's story from birth until where they are today, you would be like, I get you now. I understand why you are the way you are. And it makes so much sense. Because you're, and Brene Brown, she also says it's hard to hate someone up close, like from a distance or from a social media post. We're so quick to judge, right? If someone's wearing this, or portraying this kind of political party or this religion or whatever it is, we're so quick to judge. And I think social media is kind of created that problem even more so than what it used to be. But I think that for me it's what's wrong with our industry is we don't know what is going on in that person's life, because I think a lot of issues like a lot of the issues that happen to people when it comes to physical transformation is maybe at some point someone's life took a turn where they went through some serious trauma, and the way they dealt with that trauma, maybe for them, their outlet was food. Other people, they might have become drug addicts. Other people, they might, cling to alcohol or smoking, or other people might cling to exercise or religion to help them deal with their problems. The issue that we have is we're placing judgment on, like, hey, I didn't do that, so you shouldn't have done that. Like, you should have just been healthy about it. But you go years and years of, like, maybe mental abuse or emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, or whatever the trauma could have been. And you deal with it with maybe food as your comfort. That's your brain's way of keeping you alive. And so that's why I want people that are listening to this who might be overweight or struggle with addiction to try and have compassion for those parts of you that literally were just doing what your brain needed to do to keep you alive. It's a survival mechanism that's built in where there's too much emotional pain to deal with. And so as humans, we look for ways to escape. And yes, there are healthier escapes, like I said, exercise or reading a book or religion or whatever it is. But then there's less healthier escapes that some people get stuck in for decades at, like drugs or food, junk food or alcohol. And then, we wouldn't just go up to a drug addict and be like, dude, just stop doing drugs. What's wrong with you? Why can't you just stop doing them? It's the same thing with the food addicts that have been living this way and dealing with their emotional pain for years and decades. They know it's not healthy for them, but it's that programming. And once your brain has been programmed for X amount of years, it's really hard to create a new identity, create new neural pathways to, become this new version of you. You almost have to let this old version of you die off and create a new identity. And that's why the book Atomic Habits is such a good book, where he talks about creating a new identity, which is really hard for people because it's not like, if it was that simple, everyone would just be like, okay, I'm going to be a healthy and fit person now. Yeah, maybe the David Goggins out there can just willpower their brain and their body to do that. But I think for most people, they don't know how to do that. And they willpower their way for a month or two or a season where they lose weight. but then those patterns and behaviors are still built in, and they go back to those, that baseline once they lose the weight, and then they lose that motivation. They don't know how to create that identity. Does that make sense?
For sure. And the other thing I think that they struggle with as well is the environment, right? Like some people just have such an easier environment where they can thrive. Like if you're in an environment where, okay, you want to get healthy, but the other 3 or 4 or 5 people in your family are all eating junk food, like it's going to be so much more difficult for you to get healthy. And that's why, not necessarily all the time, but a lot of people, when they live on their own or sometimes when they become single, they'll get into like the best shape of their life because they're essentially not having any outside influences, or some of the influences that they had before are not influencing them currently. And that's why they're able to make those changes. So that's another sort of, empathetic component, particularly for like younger people who are, overweight. Like if a kid comes into my office, and I know that, I see both the parents are overweight and I know that both the kids are overweight. I mean, it's really hard for me to blame the kids. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to even, say that out loud. Right. I mean, obviously it's not their fault. And so, I think recognizing the environment is really important too. And then one other tidbit there I want to add as well. And I only learned this probably 2 to 3 years ago. So well after I was outside of medical school, but some people actually get a greater dopamine response to food than other people. And so, they may get like some of these people who are, big overeaters, it may be like, I don't know what to compare it to, but like doing a lot of cocaine or whatever. Not something again that I advocate for, just trying to make a comparison to some kind of dopamine response. So, it may be, they get this surge in, euphoria that you don't get when you have food. And so that is something that made me a little bit more empathetic as well. It's something like 50% of people who have PTSD are obese, or something like, it's so, there's definitely a huge connection there. And I think that it's something that we, just need to get the word out about so people are more empathetic,
Yeah. And I think that's just the start. We're not like making excuses for people, but what we're trying to do is when people feel seen and understood instead of judged, they're more willing to listen to like your advice or my advice or people that are trying to help them if they first feel like there's some empathy there. Like I said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I really do feel like if you come from a place of curiosity to help that person feel understood, then they're going to be more willing to actually listen to like, okay, this person sees me. I feel safe with this person. They're not judging me. They're coming from a place of curiosity instead of judgment. I'm more willing to listen to what they have to say. And maybe I'll start to develop some self-love and, learn how to create a new identity. And that's kind of where I think we need a different approach in the fitness industry. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my brand, where I've kind of created this conscious fitness approach is what I call it, where there's a lot of emphasis on developing self-awareness, which I think is the first step of overcoming any kind of addiction. And that's just where we start is self-awareness. There's a good quote by Anthony DeMello who says, what you're aware of, you're in control of, and what you're not aware of is in control of you. And that really resonates with me because I think so many people aren't even aware of their patterns or behaviors of why they do what they do. They're just kind of running on autopilot. They're subconscious programming based on the traumas and challenges they've had from the past. And they don't really realize how much that controls them until they become aware of it. And they're like, okay, I see now the connection between my childhood trauma or whatever I've dealt with and the addictions and patterns of behaviors that have developed over the years. And as you become aware of it, you can start to control it. And there's some tools that I teach people about learning how to become the observer of your thoughts in the moment so that you're not just reactive. And Viktor Frankl talks about this in the book, A Man's Search for Meaning, where between stimulus and response, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And that in that space is your power to choose. And the more space you can create, the more power you have to thoughtfully respond instead of just being reactive. And I think most people are triggered by stress or something, and then they react because of their subconscious programming. There's no space where their kids are driving them crazy. They've had a stressful day at work. All they want is a drink of alcohol, some pizza, and some chocolate, and they're like, that will, their brain is already programmed to be like, okay, you're stressed out. This is what we do. This is what we've done the past 20, 30, 40 years. And to become aware of that, of your brain doing that, you can start to create space and then thoughtfully respond like, all right, do I want to keep going down this path, or can I create a new neural pathway, a new response that's maybe breath work or meditation or going for a walk or reading a book or whatever it is to help, direct you in a new direction. But it takes time. And that's kind of like what I'm trying to do with this conscious fitness approach, instead of just like, hey, just willpower your way to follow these macros. And that's why when I help people, I try and start from the beginning of like helping them feel seen and understood, and helping them figure out why they are the way they are and why they do what they do. And then from there, you can start to create new neural pathways, or, create more space for them.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible approach. And what you said just then, I forget who you just quoted, but Carl Jung had something similar. What he said, I think he said something like, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, people call it fate." So until you're really aware of what you're doing, then you're not going to make those changes. Like if you're unaware of it, then how are you going to make the change, right? And so I think what you're doing is amazing, because you're going, backwards to a level where people can improve, at the very core, at the very root, instead of just having like a goal to get to. You're giving them almost like a new person to become,
Yeah.
and when you become that new person, then you can achieve these new goals and you can keep going with it. But if you're going to be the same person, but you're going to try to achieve these, very new, difficult goals, there's going to be a lot of rigidity there. There's going to be a lot of conflict, and, eventually something might crack. And I think that's what happens to most people, and they don't end up following through. So, I imagine that with your success, or with your, strategy, you're going to have a lot more success with your clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah. You understand it really well. I can tell.
And so you did all this once, so you did it once, you gained all the weight, and
Yep.
then you lost it, and then you did it again.
I did. I did it twice.
You did it twice. So you learned so much the first time. Why did you feel like you had to do it again a second time?
Really good question. So the first time I did it was in 2011, and there's a few reasons why I decided to do it again in 2020. First of all, social media wasn't what it is today. Like 2011, not too many people saw the journey as it happened. They heard about it after the fact, or heard from the TV show, or other TV shows that I'd been on, and they kind of like heard about this guy that did this thing. In 2020 was a chaotic year, a lot of division, and I was like, man, if there was a time in history where humanity needed more empathy, that like, now would be the time of like understanding people of why they are the way they are, and really getting like curious about their story. So I felt called to do it again. Plus I was turning 40 in 2020, where I'm like, all right, 31 years old, your metabolism's different, let's be honest. And then as a 40-year-old, we all have this idea in our heads of like, oh, like once you're 40, then everything shuts down. It's all downhill from there. And I wanted to like revisit this journey of doing it live, where it could be live streamed and people could check in on stories every single day and follow the journey as it was happening. So I decided to revisit it again with the idea of bringing more empathy at a time when I felt like the world needed it most. Plus, for all the 40-plus-year-olds, like, hey, can it be harder? Yes, it can be a lot harder as you age. But is it still possible? I wanted to also help people along that path of like, yes, it's still possible. And we'll do this journey together. That was kind of the mentality. And then also like I said, social media, getting people like to see it so that they could really understand like, okay, this is what Drew's going through. And I'll be totally honest with you. I went into it a little bit cocky, thinking I've done this before. I know what to expect. Like, I've got this. And then life has an interesting way of humbling you when you think you got it. And it was it was harder in different ways the second time around. There were some things where, for example, I didn't have an identity crisis this time around. I totally was comfortable rocking the dad bod, taking my shirt off in public, not worrying too much about what my body looked like. Like I was pretty confident that I would get my body back. But I went through a really bad breakup with my girlfriend at the time. And that's where this whole journey, was flipped upside down, where before I was eating the food to gain the weight. Now I was eating the food to escape the pain of the breakup. So sadness, loneliness, depression of the breakup. Now Ben and Jerry's ice cream and the wine was my escape. Like we talked about, when we deal with emotional pain, we look for escapes. And I started to realize how powerful emotional eating is and why people get stuck there, because it's so comfortable and it is comforting. There's something about, Ben and Jerry's ice cream and some wine that will give you a different dopamine hit than if I had salmon and a salad. And I started to empathize even more on a different level of like, man, people go through hardships in life, whether it's a breakup, a divorce, bankruptcy, losing their kids, losing a loved one, whatever it is, that can spin you, like put you down this rabbit hole of spiraling downwards and self-sabotage of like, my life sucks. I need something that makes me feel good. And so your brain looked for ways to escape. And so that was kind of my journey. And yeah, so I have no regrets doing it again. I learned more valuable lessons. I don't foresee myself doing a third one, just so people are aware of that. I don't plan on doing it. So don't expect a fit to fat to 50 when I turn 50.
And so did you eat the same foods again? Or were there new foods in 2020 that you kind of
question.
instead of in 2011?
In 2011, I was still very religious, so I didn't drink any alcohol. This time around, there's a lot of alcohol involved. But as far as foods go, it was a lot of similar foods. Cinnamon Toast Crunch was a staple. But, I think, with more restaurants and more fast food places that existed in 2020 versus 2011, there's a lot more food choices, which made it more enjoyable, if you will. But Ben and Jerry's ice cream, for example, was another addition that I didn't really have a lot of the first time around. But
awesome. And so what's kind of next for you on the journey? Like you said that you don't want to do, a third one. So now it's just more or less like building the foundation of trying to, I don't want to say reprogram because it sounds like a cult or something, but trying to like teach people to, lose weight from like, a grassroots approach, like not just like a cookie cutter, like here's your, macros and here's your workouts, do this plus this, and this equals a better body kind of thing. It's like, let's like see what's going on. Like, let's see what's going on inside your mind that's going to allow you to make the right choices to follow the macros. Like, let's see what's going inside your mind so that we understand, what's going on when, it's, you just finished a long day of work and you don't want to go to the gym, but it's on the schedule, and I think that unless you have those conversations, it's going to be pretty difficult for people to, to really, get the results that they're looking for.
Yeah. So right now I'm kind of transitioning from the Fit to Fat to Fit brand, if you will, into my conscious fitness brand. And what that looks like is I recently became a breathwork practitioner, and breathwork has been a huge addition to, my ability to help clients through, difficult, challenges of their life. Because before it was more focused on the physical side of transformation, diet and exercise, macros, calories, all the things we know we're supposed to do, but it's getting at the root cause. And I feel like breathwork is something that can really help people let go of some of these maybe emotions that they've been holding on to or pain that they've been holding on to for years. And breathwork is a way to help them release it in a healthy way. And so the way I do that is I've started, this year actually, I'm launching my first ever conscious fitness retreat here in Hawaii. I live here in Hawaii. So I have one that's already sold out in August. I have another one coming up in October, another one for 2025 in January, February, where people get to experience the breathwork, but other healing modalities, while also, a twist of health and fitness in there, but from a conscious fitness approach where, like I talked about, it's learning how to develop self-awareness and then self-love, and using that self-love as motivation to do the hard, uncomfortable things we know we're supposed to do, but not seeing it as a chore or punishment. And that's kind of where, the retreats I think are very powerful. I'm back speaking, public speaking again on stage with this conscious fitness approach. And, I just recently came back from Arizona where I teamed up with my good friend Heidi Powell from the TV show Extreme Weight Loss. Her and her ex-husband used to have a TV show And we just did a 2-day event where we did breathwork, cold plunge, sauna. And it was a very powerful thing that I think I'm going to be traveling more and doing this more, because I think that's more powerful, something I can give that's more powerful than, a shirtless selfie and like a meal plan, 30-day weight loss program. And that's kind of where I'm at these days. So
That's amazing. So the breath work. So okay, first of all, I am going to ask your opinion on psychedelics in a minute, but
sure, yeah.
with breath work. So I think a lot of people maybe just have, and I'm one of them, just understand the basics of breath work, and that's something that you can do to maybe improve your lung capacity, or maybe improve your breathing, maybe help you feel better. But the breath work that you're doing, like deep breath work, like people start crying, people start laughing, people start having emotions come up, like that sounds like the type of breath work that you're talking about. So can you maybe guide us through what a real type of deep breath work looks like, and what someone may or may not experience?
Yeah, really good question. So first of all, I'll recommend a book for everyone if they're interested in breath work. It's called Breathe by James Nestor. And he talks about all the different modalities of breath work from a physical performance standpoint of like athletes and people looking to expand their lungs. Like a lot of free divers, for example, will use breath work as a way to expand their lungs. But then from a healing perspective, the type of breathwork I do is called somatic breathwork, which is like a mini version of what's called holotropic breathwork. So holotropic breathwork is where you breathe in a certain way for about 90 minutes to 3 hours, and it puts you in a totally different, it puts you into a psychedelic state.
Yeah.
That's basically what it does. You're depriving your brain of oxygen to the point where your brain feels like you're dying. And so it releases DMT, and people have, hallucinations, and that's a whole different realm. Somatic breathwork is a 60-minute version where you're doing two different breathing modalities. The first breathing modality for the first 30 minutes is kind of like a Wim Hof style, like, in through your mouth, out through your mouth, and like kind of a faster pace. And that activates your sympathetic nervous system. So your fight or flight is activated. So your heart rate increases, your blood pressure rises, you get a little bit hot, a little bit sweaty, you get a little bit lightheaded, a little bit dizzy, kind of creates this out of body experience, which how does that lead to, people crying and emotions being released? It creates this out of body experience where these emotions that, we've been taught to suppress our emotions, especially as men, like, hey, don't feel your feelings, don't cry, man up, like push those emotions down, and hopefully they go away. Let's be honest, they don't. And this is why so many people, when they're triggered, act out of these pent up emotions that have been stored in their bodies for so long. And this type of breathing allows these emotions to come to the surface and be moved, or released through your physical body, whether you cry or you laugh, or some people might shake a little bit. And then you switch over to nasal breathing, which is very slow inhales through your nose and longer, slower exhales out through your mouth. And that activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest. And then these feelings of peace kind of flood your body, because you just like stress out your body purposely with the intense heavy inhales and heavy exhales. And then the second half is kind of meant to, calm your nervous system down and learn how to self-regulate. So the next time you're in traffic or your kids are driving you crazy and you want to punch someone in the face because you're in the sympathetic state and you want to fight or flee, learning how to slow your breathing down to come back to the present moment, and learning how to self-regulate your nervous system, I think, is a superpower that then it allows you to create that space like we talked about with Viktor Frankl. Yeah. So that now when you slow your breathing down, you come back to the present moment, you come back to your breath, you can kind of tap into your higher self, if you will, and be like, okay, do I want to punch my kid in the face? That's probably not the best thing. So like, how can I calm myself down so I'm not like reaching for the ice cream or the alcohol to like soothe myself? You learn how to self-regulate by this breathing technique. And so that's kind of what, the somatic breathwork approach is. And that's why it can be very healing for so many people. You can apply it to, like I said, from a physical performance standpoint to athletes as well. That's why I think breathwork is this thing that benefits a wide variety of the population, not just a certain type of people.
Okay. What are your thoughts on mouth taping and nose strips?
Yeah, so he talks about that in the book, Breathe by James Nestor, where he says we over time have evolved to become mouth breathers. And this is why so many people have breathing issues like asthma, and we have these our mouths are shrinking. So the teeth are becoming more crowded, and, people have, issues with their teeth, being crooked, because our food has become softer over time. And so these jaw muscles aren't as being developed like they used to. And so people have started breathing through their mouth. And so he does a study in the beginning of the book where he forces himself to breathe through his mouth only for a week. And he is miserable. Like, he does not sleep. They track his sleep. They track his blood work. They track everything, all of his markers. And he literally just becomes delirious after a week of like breathing only through his mouth, where he tapes his nose shut and puts these things in there so he can only breathe through his mouth. Then he switches over to taping his mouth shut for a week, where he has to be fed through a tube, and he only breathes through his nose. And all of these markers went away, and he sleeps better. And basically what he's insinuating is that taping your mouth shut at night is a good way to force your body to breathe through your nose, which is more efficient. We have these natural filters in our noses, and this is how we were designed to breathe, is through our nose. And so, for me, I'm a big proponent of it. I don't do it religiously all the time. I think for the most part, I sleep pretty well, and I've kind of trained my body to, consciously or unconsciously breathe while I'm sleeping, keep my mouth shut. But I think if you want to get like good at this, giving it a try, just don't do it when you're congested. That's all I recommend.
Okay.
Yeah.
And getting back to the holotropic breath work. So do you ever recommend like someone, like say one of your clients, say they have PTSD, and, that's part of the reason why they're not able to, get past their trauma or really get on with, getting a good, plan to lose weight. Like, is that someone that you could potentially bring to your retreat and then do some holotropic breath work, get that DMT release and get some trauma release? Is that something that you're working on doing?
Yeah, that's the kind of audience that I'm working towards is firefighters, police officers, SWAT, military, people who struggle, first responders, people that have these heavy emotions to deal with. And going to therapy is beneficial, but I do think there's other modalities like breathwork that can be even more profound for these people. And that's kind of why I'm trying to, widen my audience a little bit. But like, we just had an event that I would say mostly moms. And, I wouldn't say, but some of them are, all kinds of horrible things that they've been through, some women. But I think, people that struggle with serious trauma can benefit tremendously from these breathwork sessions. So that's kind of like who I'm trying to get it out to, because I do see it as medicine for the soul, if you will. And once people experience it, people have this perception of like in their head, okay, it's going to be like this. I breathe. Okay, it's going to be weird. But then when they're done with it, it's a felt experience that changes their trajectory, where they're like, something happened in that breath work that kind of like psychedelics, I would say, where something, outside of my normal range of understanding happened, that it was on a higher level, if you will, where it changed your perception of yourself or your situation, where you start to see things differently through a new lens, and it gives people hope. And it makes them feel like it's a feeling that kind of like helps them realize that, hey, maybe I am worthy to still show up in this life and show up every day. And that's kind of where I see it going, is helping those types of people.
Yeah. And that's exactly what, psychedelics do, through the research that I've seen and through the work that I, hope to do. And I do use ketamine, which isn't technically a psychedelic, but it does give people like psychedelic like experiences where they can have, big transformations. So yeah, I mean, that's incredible that you're doing, all this work. I know I only had you for an hour there, Drew. So, I'll let you go, but, yeah, where can people learn more about you online? Where can they follow you on Twitter and Instagram, and, where can they learn more about your story?
Yeah, right now it's super simple. All my social media is fit_fat_fit. So fit to fat to fit is where I'd recommend people go. It's my website. It's all my social media handles.
Awesome. Well, yeah, you were an amazing guest. Amazing journey that that you went through. You know, you really taught me a lot today, and like you can tell that like you've read a lot. I think we've read a lot of the same books actually. I can
Yeah.
just kind of tell throughout the conversation. Seems like you've put a lot, you know, of work, you know, into yourself and to becoming who you are today. And yeah, like I said, you're amazing to chat with, and I think, you know, everyone listening to this probably learned a lot today. So thank you for sharing and coming on. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And as always, I'll be back again soon.